Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining me on a new episode of the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name's Josh, and today we're doing a new album review. Been meaning to get to this one as well, and we're going to be doing the latest album by the band King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, Butterfly 3000. This is going to be episode 62. This album was released on June 11th. I've been listening to it since then, but I didn't really dive into it until like the past week or so. So, pretty excited to be reviewing this band in general, talking about them. I discovered them a few years ago, and I've been an advocate or a fan of the band since then. They're a pretty unique band. They're from Australia, and of course, they always mix up the genres and whatnot. So this is a pretty unique one for the band overall, I'm pretty sure. Even though every album or so they do it pretty differently from the previous, but we'll talk more about that here in a sec. Just want to let everyone know, podcast-wise, there is a new episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week that came out for the week of June 19th. Of course, that's pretty old news now, but Best Track ended up being Roddy Ricch. He had a pretty decent track, and Worst Track was Tom McDonald with, I think, the track Snowflakes. But we also covered heavily the album bomb that came from the Voice project from Lil Baby and Lil Durk. If you're interested on my thoughts, pretty much that's what we're going to get on the podcast for that album. I'm not going to review the album. At least I don't have plans for it. But there's also some other interesting tracks from Bad Bunny, Billie Eilish on there. So, but yeah, if you have not checked out that episode, it is on the podcast live, whether you listen to YouTube on a streaming service for the week of June 19th. But yeah, that was pretty much an album bomb episode. Be expecting another album bomb for the Polo G album on this next episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week. That's already ready to go. I'm just finishing up this review. And then, of course, our last album that we reviewed was Olivia Rodrigo's Sour. I kept that one on the back burner, and I finally did it right before the 1 month that I give myself. And interesting album, some highlights, some stuff I wasn't too fond of, but overall it's a decent debut album for this artist, and I really do dig her vocal chops, and there's tons of potential with her. So check out the album if you have not, but also check out the review. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and get to the gist of this review. Alright, so like I was saying earlier, the name of this band is King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. It's a mouthful sometimes to say. Name of the album, Butterfly 3000. This is a pretty unique album overall for this band. Just to give a brief introduction, they are an Australian rock band that was formed in 2010 in Melbourne. King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard are a band that's known for really digging into different genres, while also having a huge, vast discography. Even though they've been around for 10 years or so now, the discography is relatively big for bands that have been around that long. It consists of 18 albums at this point, including the one we're reviewing right now. One of which was actually released earlier this year, so they're absolutely known for just jamming albums out with not that much time between releases, and then even fitting, like, I think 5 or 6 into a whole entire year, while still maintaining a level of quality. And also, it's not like they're just making a very similar sound each time. I mean, the genres do vary quite massively. Like, sometimes they're making hard, heavy metal that sounds like it's like from a Metallica album. For instance, something they make microtonal rock music that uses unconventional instruments to play quarter tone notes in the music and give it an Eastern flair, quote unquote. But and then also they've delved into being just like having their own unique sound, like in an album like Nonagon Infinity. That is kind of like a jam rock album that it just is a nice piece of work from front to back. I think the band has also delved into things like folk music with just acoustic instruments. And then, I haven't listened to the whole discography. I'll be bleak about that. So I'm sure there's something I'm missing. I'm sure there's also people out there that are King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard experts that probably are scoffing and saying, oh, this dude doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. So yeah, I'm acknowledging that too. I'm a very casual fan of the band. which I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But if someone is certainly very into this band, I can see why. But anyways, backtracking, I kind of went off on a tangent. They did have an album released earlier this year. That's not too uncommon. They probably will release another album later this year. I wouldn't be surprised. But just going back a bit on the band's history, they released their first EP titled Willoughby's Beach in 2011, and also had their first debut album in 2012 come out, almost 10 years ago now. 12 Bar Brews was the name of the album. And personally, my discovery of the band didn't happen until maybe late 2016, 2017, if I'm trying to remember. When I got really into their album, Nonagon Infinity, an album that features 9 tracks that continuously blend together to form an infinite loop. So if you start the album at any point in time, you will, wind back on that same part. Of course, if you're listening to it on vinyl or something, it's not going to work out that way. But anyways, the album is one of my favorites to this day. I really do enjoy that album. There's several highlights on there. The invigorating Robot Stop that the album opens up with, Gamma Knife, the danceable Mr. Beat, the doomy People Vultures. This album overall just has a huge sense of replayability. I can listen to it, any day of the week. It just hits quite hard for its entire runtime. I really think at some point it is a highlight if we're looking at the development and history of rock and roll. It's just a solid rock album that's unique. But I will say, after being really into that album, it was a bit hard for me to keep up with the band's releases. The album after Flying Microtonal Banana was one of my most anticipated albums of that year released. I think it was in 2017 or 18. There were several tracks from that album as well that I really enjoyed to this day. Rattlesnake, Nuclear Fusion being some of them. And after that era of the band putting out music, I've been quite light on my Gizzard the Lizard Wizard listening. I still really enjoy the band, and also I have come across various singles that I really enjoy recently in the past couple of years. Planet B and Psy Boogie being a couple of them. But yeah, I've been meaning to just talk about this band since I formed the podcast. It's about a year old now. I guess I missed an opportunity earlier in February, but that's fine because I usually like going back to the artist's most previous work just to check up on it and see what was the most recent effort. How does it compare to the work of the body of work that has been released today or just most recently? And it's quite a contrast. I'm not going to lie. This album that was released in February 2021, titled LW, it's known for being their second microtonal album, like the one I mentioned earlier, Flying Microtonal Banana. I will say, going into this microtonal one, I really wasn't expecting them to do the exact thing they did on Flying Microtonal Banana. And I guess I was kind of right. This is its own sort of album on its own. And it was just nice overall, just delving into this band's work again. So I'm kind of glad I listened to this album right before, reviewing this or talking about this, their latest album, Butterfly 3000. Sorry if that's confusing. And yeah, I did find some songs that were interesting, like the opening one, If Not Now, Then When. It features a heavy funk influence with some tight pocket drumming that I found to be pretty nice. I like the overall groove this track has. The track is grand sounding at times. There's some big sounding moments that are driven by this mechanical nature that just drives the track, especially in the percussion. That's pretty common for Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard's music. I've never really figured out exactly why that is. I think it's just the drummer or drummers. There's 2 drummers typically. One of them recently left, but beside the point, there's a unique effect that happens with the 2 drummer thing going on. And then after that, the track Static Electricity seems to fit quite well into the typical Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard sound that I'm accustomed to. There's some embellishing textures on this track that can make the track eerie and even murky at times. The track seems to be one of the stronger ones on the album overall, though. East-West link also has some essential Gizzard the Lizard Wizard attributes, the typical drum feels, the usage of microtonal melodies filling out the track, and of course the mechanical rhythm section driving it. The ending track, Kglw, was a bit of an outlier though, so I was surprised to hear this. It's essentially a metal track that incorporates the concept of keeping the microtonal ideas, but the track feels quite grandiose with its runtime, and the changes the track goes through in coloring these sections that just sound like impending doom. It's an interesting album. In comparison, I don't think I like it more than Flying Microtonal Banana, but just because this album keeps it a bit more typical of what you'd expect from Gizzard the Lizard Wizard, going into Butterfly 3000, in my opinion, was just a bit harder to digest. And I guess there's good reason for that, because Butterfly 3000 ditches the whole rock-centric approach this band typically has. And what I mean by that is guitar, bass, drums, and vocals. I mean, that's essential to rock music. At the end of the day, Gizzard and Lizard Wizard, as much as they experiment, they're pretty much a rock band, a very good rock band. But they take it a bit of an interesting direction, especially with the concept on here. I guess usually their albums have concepts. If I had to say the concept on here, it would be synthesizers and ditching a lot of electric guitar and making it feel fluffy and poppy. I've heard this album described as being dream pop. I don't know if I go as far as saying it's a dream pop album. I'd say it's more of like a synth pop album, because there's really not much like of the typical jangly, reverby, effect-driven dream pop stuff going on here. I will say, like, this really isn't related to like that side of the spectrum of shoegaze and dream pop. This is more, I think, being bubbly and chirpy, or just giving that sensibility of the music. And that's their approach to this. So I'd say maybe like indie or synth pop is more appropriate. But I did come out on this album thinking that I do like this side of the band. I just don't know if I like it as much as what I'm accustomed to, which was like the stuff that I really got into, which was, like I said earlier, the Nonagon Infinity stuff. But starting with the intro track, Yours. It really just kind of, I don't know if it's on the nose, but it sounds like that one Postal Service track that everyone loves, that was like on so many different commercials. Just the way they're going about making this type of stuff is like almost the same charm you get off of listening to a Postal Service track right off the bat, with the prominent synth implementation. I do love the bubbly texture on the synths, though. It shows up all throughout this album. The soft vocals on much of this track do blend in quite nicely. A nice overall groove that drives this track too. There's an interesting trade-off between the more organic instrumentation when it comes in and the synths that are a nice feature. And that happens on several different songs on this album as well. And also there's a nice light touch of harmonica thrown in. There's a dry and thick bass guitar at times that's nice. It's nice to hear. Really dig this opening track. The next one, Shanghai, is also a really lovely cut. I love the opening synth melody that has some subtle grit to it. It certainly sounds a bit melodic and almost as if it's another vocal texture with how it's implemented in the track. It's just a nice little theme that goes on. Also here we get some more nice organic instrumentation trading off with the synths. And also I dig the rich piano chords that are added towards the end, going along with this ride cymbal groove. Lovely light color that's created there. It's a solid track. I will say there is a bit of a lapse after that and what I find to be a highlight, but the track after that, Dream, it was just another cut that had more bubbly synth-driven attributes that develop and play around with this thematic lead synth melody. The cymbals on the drum track are actually quite crisp and clear too. I love how those cut through. It complements the overall, song as it decays and grows quieter. There's also a nice decrescendo to end the track out. The track after that, Blue Morpho, was kind of like the song's cousin. I love how the interpolation or like manipulation of that synth melody from the previous track goes into being the main theme of this track. It just ends up sounding a bit wonkier. The track is also just filled with like these lush textures that embellish the track and make it quite rich. The next cut, Interior People, it's starting to sound, at this point in the album, we kind of get a pretty consistent nature. There's bubbly synths thrown on this track like the past few other tracks. At this point in the project, I can kind of start to see some parallels between many of the tracks. Like I said earlier, the track leans heavily on some of the features that were presented on the opening tracks, with the organic instrumentation trading off with the synth textures and the electronic textures. Also, the blending of the tracks can be a bit like Nonagon Infinity. The instrumental interlude that is centered around the melodic acoustic guitar here can also sound like it was taken straight from that album too. And what I mean by like the blending of the tracks is like a lot of these tracks blend in together seamlessly, like, you know, like it's a loop. I don't think it happens on every single point of the album, but it happens a lot. I will say the track after that, Catching Smoke, was really quite interesting. I dug it a lot. I will say the track sounds a bit more distinct in comparison to the rest of the project. Feels a bit upbeat and more poppy than anything else. The punchy and prominent deep synths can feel very LCD sound system like. It's hooky and also very catchy with the main synth line on this chorus. And I just really love the direction that this track goes with, being dark and moody in the overall nature. Especially when we get to the bridge, where we get some rumbling deep synths that sound like Stranger Things music from the show. It's not bad. I love the instrumentals, and I love that the instrumentals take the forefront on this track. 2.02 Kglw Year was interesting as well. There's some fast, fluttering synths that kind of remind me of the more vibrant moments from the last Kelly Lee Owens album. But the track ends up sounding a lot like other tracks on the album, minus the featured female vocalist, which I think is uncredited. The accented cymbal hits make the track a lot more exciting, so I do dig that there's some character in, you know, certain parts of the music. But I'm a bit meh. I do appreciate the louder crescendo section towards the end of the track where we get a nice climax. I thought that part was good. But after that, we get Black Hot Soup, which is definitely more reminiscent of a typical King Gizzard sound, with the stark psych influence and the plucked acoustic guitars playing a trancey pattern in a repetitive manner. It's a bit of an outlier in the overall context of the album, but I think it's an interesting cut overall. After that, we get one of the weaker tracks, though, Yeah Love. Here we get more of like this gritty texture on some of the synths structuring the track. But I will say some of the textures they used on the percussion, like whatever they used on here for the snare, sounds like someone is shaking a bag of rice. It's a bit distracting. I'm not sure how I dig the Yeah Love moment on the track that's sung over and over again. It's not as hooky as I think they maybe were thinking. And yeah, this track is just a bit of a head scratcher. And by the time we're there, we're at the last cut or song, which is Butterfly 3000. And this song just kind of blends in quite seamlessly with the previous track. And I hear a bit more similarity in how the electronic elements are being used in comparison to the latest Kelly Lee Owens album again. I don't know if that's just a coincidence, but the track can feel maybe slightly underdeveloped compared to the rest of the tracks on the album. But I do appreciate the chaotic percussive moments as the track ends, though, but I just end up being a bit meh on that track as well. And yeah, overall, I'm just left feeling that this is a good album, but that it probably had a bit more potential. I do like that they have this band has this capability and this side of them that where they're able to lean heavily on making music that is very synthy and poppy. I just don't know if this was as refined as it could have been, which I guess totally makes sense because when you're putting out this much music and have this vast of a discography, you can't really kind of hone into just one thing. But I would like to see King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard do something like this again, or hell, maybe even go into that dream pop direction that a lot of people are seeing in this, or even like hell, if they could do it shoegaze, I'd love to hear their take on that. But if they're going to be doing this kind of stuff, I will say I did enjoy a lot more of the tracks that felt more like dancey or indie pop, or just hooky and catchy. Everything else maybe seemed a little bit underdeveloped, or just maybe too experimental for me to actually get into. But I will say there's a lot of beautiful moments on here, especially with the opening. The opening of this album, like Yours, Shanghai, and then even into Dream. That's a very nice moment in the overall album. But I will say there's some divots throughout that. I guess it's just not 100% of a smooth ride to the end of the album. But I do enjoy it. I do still appreciate what this band does. And I'll give it a 6 out of 10. I will say, yeah, I'm enjoying this, but I don't think I'm enjoying it as much as like some recent things that I gave, I guess, like to J. Cole's album, which I gave a 7. I'm just kind of like somewhere in between, but I think this is certainly fine. And I'm sure there will be more stuff to listen to from this band, especially since they're like releasing independently now. I guess they're label-less, which I mean gives them even more freedom. But yeah, I don't know really what the typical King Gizzard fan would think about this. If you're more on the side of appreciating the metal stuff they put out and the more hard-hitting, energetic things or the microtonal stuff, this might be difficult to digest because I guess this is a little bit more simplified compared to the other stuff that they do. But there's still a lot to take from this. And I generally think this can also expand their fan base, because this is touching on something they haven't done before. At least I believe so. So, yeah, pretty decent album. Glad I listened to it, but that's the end of the review. If you stuck with me to the end, thanks for listening. My name's Josh. Like and subscribe on YouTube if you like what you're hearing. If not, leave a comment, good or bad. Also, subscribe on your preferred listening service. But yeah, I don't know what I'm reviewing next. We'll see. If you have any suggestions, you could also comment too. But I'll see you next time.